Yeah, so for those who don't know, my name's Pete, and I'm on the team here. It's a bit quiet this morning, including my parents, who couldn't be bothered to show up. And I'm preaching. No, they're on holiday. They're on holiday, we'll let them off. Also, if the computer, we're now using my laptop, so if the computer screensaver comes in, actually Caleb knows the password, but it's a pretty picture of, don't worry, it's not a picture of my kid or anything like that. Is this working? Oh, don't say this is broken. Should we just go home? We good? We're good. Okay. So we are in week 11 of our series on Defiant Joy. I think this might be one of the longest series we've done. It's definitely the longest series for a few years, isn't it? It's week 11. And I think there's 2 more to go. But we're getting there as we look through the book of Philippians. Now, my talk this morning is titled Unity in the Lord. And if you remember back to week, I don't know what week it was, when Anya spoke, she spoke about unity. So this is something that's clearly Paul thought it was important enough to talk about twice. So just if you haven't listened to the other talks, I encourage you to go back. They're all available on our website or on YouTube, and you can listen back to them. And also, if you don't have a Bible, we have some New Testaments that Dan would like to get rid of, so we'd like to order some new ones. So if you haven't got one, you can take one of these, because everything we are going to talk about in Philippians is in this book, so you can have a read of it there. Okay, so just a quick recap. If you remember, Philippians, Paul's writing from prison, and although we've been going through it week by week, it was written as one long letter to the church in Philippi. And some parts are gentle and encouraging, and other parts have been more challenging. And this part is a bit gritty at the end, where Paul addresses a specific issue head on, which is a conflict between these 2 women that we read about. And in fact, they're not mentioned anywhere else in the Bible apart from here. And I've had to Euodia, and Syntyche or Syntyche or Syntyche or Syntyche. I've got the difficult words. So if you've got your Bibles, we're going to read from Philippians 4, 1-3. It's going to be on there. You can follow along. It says, "Therefore, my brothers and sisters, you whom I love and long for, my joy and crown, stand firm in the Lord in this way, dear friends. I would plead with Euodia, and I plead with Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. Yes, I ask you, my true companion, help these women, since they have contended at my side in the cause of the gospel, along with Clement and the rest of my co-workers whose names are in the book of life." Right. So now we don't know much about these 2 women. Like I said, this is the only time they're mentioned. But Paul does say that they contended at his side for the cause of the gospel. So these women were dedicated to the mission of the church and the mission of sharing the good news of Jesus. And they were dedicated to spreading the love and the offering of hope. However, it appears that their quarrel had been something significant enough to distract the church. And so here, Paul sees or hears about this conflict and thinks it's serious enough to publicly call it out and tell them to resolve their dispute for the sake of the church and for the sake of unity. Now, we don't know what their disagreement was about. It doesn't say that. But picture these 2 dynamic women who clearly were important, a big deal in the church of Philippi. Otherwise, I don't think Paul would have mentioned them and we would have never heard of them. But both of them are clearly passionate and committed to the mission, and they clashed over something. And so their feud became so infamous that even Paul, sitting in a prison somewhere else, heard about it and felt that he needed to step in and be a peacemaker from afar. It's almost if Paul had written all of this, epic letter to the church in Philippi and just finished it off by saying, "Hey, you 2, you've got to pack it in." In fact, those words, "pack it in, you 2, are often heard in our house. Generally, Eleanor talking to me and Anya. But Paul pleads with them. He says, I plead with Euodia and I plead with Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. He pleads with them individually. I don't think this repetition is a mistake. By addressing each woman separately, he emphasizes that he's not taking sides. He could have simply written, I plead with you, or I plead with you. But instead, he chose to make it clear that he was pleading with each of them. Paul urges each of them to both strive for unity and peace rather than focus on who was right and wrong. He's begging them to prioritize the gospel instead of prioritizing their personal conflict. And we have a picture of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, this church here. Now, lots of you may know that this church is believed to be built on the over the site of the cave where Jesus was buried, and is obviously considered a sacred place in Christianity. But this site has been a place of constant conflict for different Christian groups for a long, long, long time. And in fact, in 1792, I think, in my notes it says 1972, but that's not true. Something's got changed here. The Muslim Ottoman, the Sultan in charge of Jerusalem at the time, issued a decree to try and resolve these conflicts that were going on in this church. And he divided the church amongst the Christian groups that were fighting over it. And I think next we've got a map that this is actually as it is now. So each of those colours, a different group of Christians controls that area of the church. So we gave the Latins, the Catholics, the Greek Orthodox, the Armenian Orthodox, the Syrian Orthodox, the Copts, the Ethiopians. They've all got a bit that they're in control of. Each group have been given a portion of the church. Now, this arrangement, I didn't know this until I was preparing for this talk. It's called the status quo. That's where, it's not the rocking all over the world and all that, but that's where this term comes from. So despite this decree, the groups have continually struggled to work together in managing the church. And this, of course, is just one example we can think of disunity within the church with a big C, and I'm sure we can all think of others that are closer to home. But isn't it tragic that a church meant to honour Christ is plagued by such conflict amongst his followers? I think it's a far cry from Christ's call to love one another. As Jesus prayed that they may be one as we are one, the church with the big C often seems unable to fully embody the love and harmony that Jesus desires. And of course, conflict is as old as humanity itself. From the early days of Adam and Eve, as sin and human nature took hold, they experienced conflict and even tried to deceive an all-knowing, all-seeing God. But conflict is not from God, but as God's people, we are not immune to it. As we strive to be transformed, to have the mind of the Lord, and to live in a way that transcends our human nature, conflict is inevitable in every group of people. However, true community is not marked by the absence of conflict, but by the presence of a reconciling spirit. Now, I'm sure there'll be certain times where you've not agreed or had peace with someone else in this room. And let's face it, it's probably the person you live with the most. And it's probably on the way to church, anything like us, it'll be probably on the way to church this morning that you've not agreed. But in all seriousness, it's impossible when we really get alongside each other, when we really are right up in each other's business, not to have moments of tension. So these moments can arise from comments of people that we don't know that well, or annoying habits of those that you do know well, leadership styles that clash with our personal preferences maybe, lack of perceived interest from others. And it's often not the big things, but small irritations that breed disharmony. And of course, keeping those conflicts to ourselves may seem harmless. We're the only ones who know that that person over there really irritates me, so as long as I keep it inside. But it could lead to avoiding that person or sharing frustrations with others that can spread negativity, distractions during worship, avoiding church if you know that person's going to be there. So you see, conflict distracts from the core message of the gospel, which is love, hope, and truth. And it affects us as individuals, but it also affects us as a community. And ultimately, disunity distracts from the gospel message. So Paul's emphasis on resolving conflict highlights its importance. Addressing disunity is crucial to maintaining focus on the gospel. Disunity distracts, and here we read that Paul calls it out. But the good news is there are many principles in that passage that, when applied seriously in the guidance of God, can help resolve conflict in your life. So what instructions does Paul us in Philippians here? So he tells us to be of the same mind. Easier said than done, right? When people think, oh, that person's says some weird things. But this is not just a passive state. It's an action like putting on new clothes. And it requires intention and purpose to do it. Think of putting on armor. When we make a choice to clothe ourselves in unity, it protects us spiritually. Unity is an action, a verb, a doing word. You know what verb is? We'll learn about verbs, Lottie. Vicky will be able to sing a song. A verb is something that you do, A verb is something that you do, like walking, talking, sitting on the loo. A verb is something that you do. There we go. That's how Lottie taught me that. So next time you're sitting on the toilet, you shall be reminded of unity in the Lord. So it's not this sort of ethereal concept, unity. It requires effort and commitment. So in his letter to the Romans, Paul also emphasizes the importance of mindset, where it says, be transformed by renewing of your mind. And John spoke about that, I recall, when he spoke. This transformation is a change of the spirit that takes effort and dedication. To be different, to embody unity, requires us to actively work towards it by practicing the way of Jesus. Not striving, but practicing with intention. By applying these teachings with God's presence and guidance, we can foster unity and resolve conflict in our lives. And as we desire to be of the same mind, we protect ourselves spiritually and create a community grounded in love and harmony. Now, the Greek word phroneo, which is used in this passage in the original Greek. Now, I'm not a Greek scholar. Google helped me with this, just full transparency. So if there is a Greek scholar in the room and I've got it wrong, can come tell me afterwards. It won't be the only thing that I've realised I've got wrong in this talk when I was preparing, but I've taken those bits out, I think. But this is commonly translated to think or to have a mindset or to have an attitude, but its meaning extends beyond cognitive process. It's a combination of thinking and of attitude, encompassing the whole orientation of your mind and your heart. It signifies an alignment between the inner disposition and your outward behaviour. And here in Philippians, Paul uses this word to encourage believers to adopt a Christ-like mindset, emphasising unity and humility and selflessness. In Philippians 2, the bit that Anya shared on earlier on in the series says, make my joy complete by being like-minded, phroneo, having the same love and being one in spirit of one of one mind. So here, phroneo refers to the collective mindset and attitude that believers should share, reflecting the unity and harmony and God's desire for the church. And similarly, here in Philippians 4, Paul urges these two women to be of the same mind. It's the same word. He calls them to adopt a unified, Christ-centered attitude. And this word encapsulates this idea of a Christ-like mindset of unified attitude. It's both thought and action together, promoting harmony and mutual understanding amongst believers. Now, Paul underscores this unity in Christ by using the phrase, in the Lord. This phrase appears in every chapter of Philippians, somewhere or other, and highlights a moment when God intervenes in extraordinary ways, setting an expectation for the extraordinary to happen in normal human moments. So in chapter 1, when Paul's in prison, he inspires courage and fearlessness in believers in the Lord. In chapter 2, when Epaphroditus falls ill, and nearly dies and then recovers, Paul instructs the church to welcome him in the Lord and show him honour. In chapters 3 and 4, amid opposition and persecution and anxiety, Paul advises the church to rejoice in the Lord. And here, Paul pleads with these two women to be of the same mind in the Lord. You see, Paul believes that as Christians, we should expect what is possible in the Lord, not what is likely or plausible. He calls us not to merely, not to just try and resolve our issues ourselves, but seek God's intervention. You see, when we bring God into our conflict, he can transform those human desires on both sides to be his desire that brings unity and peace. So whatever this conflict was about with these two women, Paul is pleading with them to put the unity of the church before their personal issue with one another. And Paul is making a case that Christian unity is more beautiful and more powerful than we can possibly understand. And so here he casts a vision for unity. He talks about the beauty of unity, the challenges of unity, and the power of unity. So we're going to look at those 3 points now. So firstly, the beauty of unity. So it says, therefore, my brothers and sisters, whom I love and long for, my joy and crown, stand firm in the Lord in this way, dear friends. So Paul's language here, affectionate language, is unmistakable and refers to his believers as joy and crown. Can you imagine being called that? I've never been called that. The emphasis in deep bonds of love and fellowship are foundational to Christian unity. Unity is not merely an agreement about theology or practice or what worship styles we like. It's deeply rooted in love that believers have, or we have, for one another. And this affection mirrors the love that Christ has for his church. And the beauty of unity lies in deep bonds of love and mutual support, and the strength and the firm faith to stand together, and the joy and honour found in unified community. And when we strive for this unity, we embody the transformative power of the gospel and offer a compelling witness to the world. However, cultural challenges often stand in the way of this beautiful unity. And the church today, like it has for hundreds, thousands of years, faces political, racial, generational, economic divides. Yet, in the Lord, there can be unity that crosses all of these lines. And we need to remember that as believers, our loyalty to Jesus should surpass our loyalty to any political party, any worldly cause or ideology. First and foremost, we must identify as followers of Jesus. Now, this is a big week coming up in this country. Firstly, Ellen has made it to the final of the 600 metres in her sports day. As much as I said, set your expectations low, Ellen. You're the smallest kid in the class. You're not going to be fast. She came home and said, I made the final, Dad. And Lottie, yes, Lottie, we've got to take her to Milton Keynes to win some award that she's won, that we didn't even know she'd entered. I knew Eleanor had entered it, but it turns out Lottie's won it, or runner-up or something. We're still not 100% sure. It's a big week. Oh, and of course, on Thursday, we've got the election. Now, I'm a bit of a political nerd. And in fact, Anya came into my office the other day and I was watching something. She said, you are a political nerd. I'll watch anything that's got a politician in it. I'll watch Prime Minister's Question Time. I mean, I've been nerding out for weeks for debates. I'm all over it. I'll watch it for hours. I'll watch the House of Commons. I must be the only person in the country to watch. You watch it. Alan watches it. We're going to set up a WhatsApp group where we can just comment on, he said what? That'll be the smallest group on the old church WhatsApp group, for sure. However, as I've been nerding out in this election campaign, it it's highlighted some deep, if you didn't already know, some deep political divides within our country. And this moment has been marked by intense passion, diverse opinion, strong beliefs about different political leaders, whether they're even any good. And in such a time when disagreements are amplified, the church has a unique opportunity to present a countercultural narrative. Our primary ideas and loyalties should not be rooted in political parties. Political diversity existed even amongst Jesus' disciples, like Simon the Zealot and Matthew the tax collector. They had completely opposing views, but they were unified by their passion for Jesus. And the author, Scott Saul, highlights this beautifully beyond the screen when he said, Matthew's emphasis on a tax collector and zealot living in community together suggests a hierarchy of loyalties, especially for Christians. Our loyalty to Jesus and his kingdom must always exceed our loyalty to an earthly agenda, whether political or otherwise. We should feel at home with people who share our faith but not our politics, even more than we do who share our politics but not our faith. If this isn't our experience, then we may be rendering to Caesar what belongs to God. So this week, this very week, we get to practice unity as a church. And as we approach this election, don't worry, I'm not going to talk about politics for the next 20 minutes, I'm moving on a minute. As we approach this election, let's remember that while political engagement, of course, is important and necessary, it should never overshadow our commitment to Christ and his teachings. So secondly, the challenge of unity. Despite sharing a common faith, as Christians, we can often find ourselves divided by numerous factors, not just political preferences. And I'm just going to go over a couple, but obviously you can probably think of lots of different things that would divide people. It could be doctrinal differences, cultural backgrounds, personal preferences. And these divisions can hinder the church's witness and dilute the power of the gospel. And in an age of hostility where different groups are vying for attention and shutting down other groups who might think something different to them, we have an opportunity to lead the way in reconciliation. So what hope do we have this week in our humanness? By Friday, let's be honest, by Friday there'll be a bunch of people who'll be really happy, there'll be a bunch of people who are really angry, and there'll be an even bigger bunch of people who couldn't give a monkey's. But in the Lord, he can reconcile us to one another. And one of the major issues that I've been hearing about when I've been politically nerding out is around immigration. Now, this topic seems to have dominated discussions, and whenever you get some politicians on the TV or on the radio talking, it doesn't seem long before the conversation gets turn to this issue. You know, you've got one side saying, well, we shouldn't let anyone in. Another one saying, we should let everyone in. And it just seems at every turn, there seems to be division. Now, I'm not going to stand here and tell you what to think. That's not my place. But in these issues, in the Lord, he can reconcile us to one another. And the first century church in Antioch, recorded in Acts 11, is a powerful example of a racially diverse, unified congregation. Believers from various backgrounds across the city came together, united under the lordship of Jesus. Now, in those days, different groups were separate, and they were split up over ethnic groups or, where they were from, what they believed. But in Antioch, when the Christian message came, they had to think of a new name for these people because there was no way of explaining how these people were unified together. And that's where we read that the term Christian was used for the first time. And this new identity for this group of people that no one knew. Why are those people unified? What is it? Because they shouldn't be together. And this community was so unique that they astounded a city. Their unity together astounded the other people who lived there. So much so that the city had to think of a new name for them. They didn't have any context. They didn't have any words to describe it. And what would it look like, when I was preparing for this, I was getting like, what would it look like for our community to be so unique, so diverse, yet so unified, despite our obvious differences, that we astounded Northampton? Now, on our own, of course, we don't have any hope of doing that. Who are we? We're just sat in a room on a Sunday morning. But in the Lord, this can be our story. Another division that is facing the country is economics. Now, I don't know, this might be maybe a hyperbole, but I can't think of another time in my lifetime, particularly, where the country has seemed so divided economically, and it just seems so pronounced. According to recent data, Andy said you could get the people to model this out. I'm not sure I can do that because I'm not that good at math. But for those who are, you can try and work this out in your mind. So according to recent data, the richest 10% of households in the UK, this is in the UK, hold 43% of the wealth, while the bottom 50% possess just 9%. And wealth of the UK's top 350 wealthiest individuals exceeds £795 billion. Now, if you're one of those 355 people, Dan would love to chat to you afterwards. So this increasing wealth and poor divide in this country, and it seems to be rising, especially with child poverty. And the Trussell Trust, which obviously you all heard of, is a big food bank charity, distributed 3.1 million food parcels last year. And to bring it closer to home, Northampton Food Bank, which is part of Restore, which is based here, I think this is in the last year. I'm looking for Anya in the last year. So this is in this building. Distributed over 6,000 food parcels to our community, assisted over 10,000 adults and children. And our Grow Baby has had over 700 referrals for basic clothing and essentials. And Restore are predicting that it's just going to get more and more and more. It's not going to go down. And the Bible highlights this divide between people with different economic values. The first 3 people to be converted in the book of Acts are Lydia, who was a wealthy merchant. We know that because she sold purple cloth. A slave girl who was making money for somebody else. And then the Roman jailer, who was the middle class. So even in those first 3 converts, it showed the unity of Jesus across economic divides. So many sectors of society, people are divided by their economic status. And wealth often determines access to resources or education and opportunities, creating significant social divides. However, the church is called to be a place where those barriers are broken down. And I don't know about anywhere else other than in the church, where people who come from completely different backgrounds can come together and become friends and share life together and care for one another, regardless of their net worth. But what hope do we have to do that on our own? None. But in the Lord, he can reconcile us to one another. Now, I've just talked about a few areas that can breed disunity, but the list is almost endless. You think about them: theological, ideological, generational. What hope do we have to be unified on our own? But in the Lord, he can reconcile us to one another. So the first thing Paul points out is the beauty of unity. The second thing he points out is the challenge of unity. And the last thing is the power of unity. So the power of unity. I'm convinced that the enemy understands the immense power of unity amongst God's people better than anyone. That's why disunity in the church is such a destructive force. And I think Paul understood this as well. See, when Christians are unified, when there is Christian unity, it acts like a really powerful weapon. Think of the most powerful weapon you can. I don't know anything about weapons, but, a nuclear bomb. That's the power of Christian unity in the Lord. When people come together in unity, they access a level of spiritual authority and potency that is beyond our full understanding. It's probably the biggest weapon that we have against the enemy is Christian unity. And this divine unity not only unleashes God's power, but also his abundant blessing. In the second chapter of Acts, we read about Pentecost, when the Spirit came on them at Pentecost, and it said they were all with one accord in one place. He didn't come to bring them into one accord. He came because they were already of one accord. The Spirit came to those who, through repentance and faith, brought their hearts together. And it is possible, I think, when we finally get to be with Jesus, that we will fully begin to understand the power of unity and look back on our lives, realizing we probably grossly underestimated the power that we really did have at our disposal. I don't know if you've ever read Psalm 133. It says, how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. It's like precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard, running down on Aaron's beard, down on the collar of his robe. It is as if the dew of Hermon was falling on Mount Zion. For there the Lord bestows his blessing, even life forevermore. God bestows a blessing. And why does he do that? Because he sees unity. God cannot help but pour out blessings when we come together in unity. And that makes me wonder, what blessings has God got in store for us as a church as we learn to be together in unity? What's God holding on to and waiting to pour out in response to a supernatural unity that we have or can have? And my prayer is that as we come together in unity, that we can be a church that astounds the city, astounds Northampton with a message of unity. And remember what I said earlier, community is not an absence of conflict, but the presence of a reconciling spirit. And let's think about these two women again that we're still talking about 2,000 years later. What hope in their stubbornness and in their humanness did these two women have to unify, to get along? None. But in the Lord, reconciliation and unity were possible for them. Shall we stand?